Oh, yeah.
Just click record here one moment. See if this works. Pause, stop recording. Okay, go. I'm sorry. Excuse me. Go ahead.
Hi, welcome everybody. This is Generation Z with Dan Winter. This is going to be our 4th lecture with Dan sharing with our community. And please tune in to the previous 3 lectures. They are on Dan Winter's YouTube account, which we will put in the link. We'll share the link in the video description below. And without further ado, Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. That YouTube link, by the way, is simple. youtube.com/Dan Winter Fractal Field. And I'm particularly pleased that Rial has joined us as co-host here, standing in for Dave for a minute. We were chatting before. Rial has indigenous Canadian blood, Maite, and we were talking about the shamanic inclinations thereof. And, you know, we've been saying about how the indigenous tribes had the kind of embeddability in the DNA from thousands of generations of walking the same magnetic line, enabling that purported coherence in the braiding of the blood to increase the ability to basically bend the light, fold the magnetism, inhabit the magnetic lines. And that closer relationship with the grid, I'll just hit pin here one moment. That closer relationship with the grid, literally fractality with respect to the magnetic lines that the indigenous people inhabited, enabled increased ability to lucid dream, steer the song lines, make the rain. And so what we're talking about in this evening's conversation is much related, actually. The title of tonight's conversation, Quality of Grace, Science for the Care and Feeding of the Human Aura. Subtitled, Your Only Immortal Potential. Now, as many of you know, we have been doing lectures on physics of consciousness, science of consciousness, physics of sacred geometry for something like 30 years, which is why my beard is such that the local children call me Papa Noel. So, but notwithstanding, as we teach the physics of consciousness, the end of virtually every lecture is the same, which is to say, if you make a big aura, then you get an immune system, you lucid dream, and you take memory through death. In other words, quite literally, electrically, from an engineering viewpoint alone, the purpose of life is obviously to get a big aura. And in fact, we even suggest it is to the point that almost literally every single decision you make every day, who to hug, who to kiss, what broccoli to eat, and what building to sit in, where to find your sacred space to be, every single decision of every single day, theoretically, could well be made based on the criteria, does this make my aura bigger or smaller? Like, am I gonna stand under this mercury vapor light in this store and let it melt my aura down or not? So the obvious question that everyone should ask from a scientific engineering viewpoint about the physics of spirituality and consciousness is, well, then does anyone have the complete guide to growing your aura? In other words, let's get practical here and not be theoretical and discuss the science of making a big aura. And that's supposedly the impetus for this evening's conversation. Also intending that this could hopefully be some of the most practical conversations that we've had. I would also note that my friends, I call them my friends, the Andromedans, purportedly said that religion became relatively obsolete on this planet roughly 500 years ago, obviously poisonous personality and miracle worship aside, at the point at which science was enabled to teach the necessary hygiene for growing your spiritual aura body. So the very issue of the fact that religions obviously have become mostly perverse on this planet, not that the original intention is bad, and the physics behind religion can be a beautiful thing, but in fact, almost all the physics of religion, and you can see our Ending Religion War videos, and you can see our Dictionary of Jesus Physics, which went viral. Almost all of the religion, the useful part of religion is that which teaches you how to grow your aura. that's really the useful part of religion on this planet. Now, once that is teachable as a perfectly shareable science, pure principle, self-empowering, and beautiful, then, hint, hint, hopefully religion wars are obsolete. And further, we are self-empowered. And so that's another context for having a very practical conversation about, well, then what indeed is a summary of the science of getting a big aura. So we're going to have some thoughts about, first, let me tell you a few things about your aura that you maybe never thought of it that way. You know, when Sister Mary Nunn told me, as I walked up to the communion rail at St. Mary's Church in East of Eden, New York, she said, walk with the quality of grace. And I meditated on that for a long time. And I said, well, grace, huh? And somewhere maybe in late graduate psychophysiology after electrical engineering, I think I actually got an idea of what Sister Mary Nunn meant by quality of grace, actually. And basically, my conclusion is that the quality of grace is a name for the physics of what it is to accrete or implode or attract capacitive charge, literally biologic aura. So the reason that you walk in a certain style to attract grace, which is literally charge, which is literally charging your aura, is that there is a geometry called calculus of curvature, which enables you to attract the capacitive charge, living biologic plasma, named grace, if you happen to be religious. This conversation is not intended to make religion any less beautiful. The beauty, even the ancestral memory, as Ariel might agree, the ancestral memory that comes with what was called grace, the charge in your aura, understanding that using physics makes it even more beautiful, because you can understand how ancestors could live and inhabit that intelligent plasma. And that plasma is so intelligent that it will choose whose body to inhabit as you walk into church and touch that holy water and bless yourself, okay? In fact, we know exactly what makes holy water holy, and it's very measurable. You know, if you use the GDV, for example, to measure holy water, the same way that Korotkov pioneered measuring sacred space. 3 different ways we now have to measure sacred space electrically, one of which is the GDV. And we're going to show those pictures in a moment at goldenmean.info/architecture, where we display 3 different electrical ways to measure and optimize sacred space, in which that density of charge implosion enables your aura to grow. And in fact, where Korotkov originally proved that he could measure electrically, replicably, the place where the Kogi went to make phone calls to ancestors. The reason ancestor phone calls were made possible by that measurement, and he called it fractality in the GDV, which was fractality in the air, which he and I discussed in depth. Konstantin Korotkov is an old friend. And we both agreed that what he's measuring at fractality in air is precisely what we have been calling charge distribution efficiency, which is precisely what we now measure at flameinmind.com/lifeforce, our life force measuring tech, where we simply take a capacitor, in this case, the electrodes of a brainwave device, and spectrum analyze 1 microvolt, millionth of a volt, and that will tell us which tree has got the Schumann harmonics, and thus which space is sacred. And by the way, you can measure which tree is going to grow and which one's going to die by measuring whether you're getting those Schumann harmonic cascades in the tree. Maybe we should dig up those pictures here in a minute. But before we do, I wanted to finish the thought here, so that actually the reason that fractality in the aura, which in the GDV, gas discharge visualization, the clinically calibrated Curlian, measures sacred spaces, he simply measures whether or not the capacitive discharge at the sacred site has an aura which is fractal, which means harmonic inclusive. We now know from the medical literature that that same concept of harmonic inclusiveness is the fastest way there is to measure your heart rate, HRV, to determine if you have an immune system. So this is the point I wanted to get to here. Yes, I'm getting there now. So immune health, medically proven, equals harmonic inclusive or fractal heart rate variability. Sacred space equals harmonic inclusive or fractal capacitance or charge distribution, which simply means efficient charge compression. And if you want smaller words here, visualize a rose, and electrically, you got the picture. That's what sacred space is electrically. So the fun part of this is, and here's how I really wanted to start this conversation. I've been meditating all day on how I wanted to say this. And this is the most important thing I think I wanted to say today right here, which is, now that we know medically, scientifically, electrical engineering, we know for sure that having a big aura measures and determines whether or not you have an immune system, ability to resist parasites also, and whether or not you're going to be able to lucid dream, because you can propagate coherently that plasma, remote view astral travel, and whether or not you are going to take memory through death. Quite literally, that coherence in your plasma, your aura, the Ba from the Ka, the Kesjan body, the rainbow light body, lots of names, but we now know what it is electrically. It's implosive propagation of longitudinal EMF coherence into the array, fractal array, that you then inhabit the bigger array, which fits all the ancient indigenous stories. The Maid of the Mist at Niagara Falls, the reason that ghost is so pervasive, there's an array there. So the indigenous stories fit the physics beautifully. So the most important point I wanted to make here, the most important point of the whole evening really is the following, and that is, it is now scientifically and engineering and medically provable that your aura determines your health, your immune health, your ability to lucid dream, your ability to take memory through death, your only possibility of getting immortal, probably the only part of you that has any immortal potential is your aura. And yet, your doctor, your architect, the guy who designed your hospital, the guy who designed the medical stabbing that they're forcing in your kids, and the guy who designed your school, and the guy who votes in your parliament, all of those people don't even believe you have an aura. What's wrong with this picture? That's my main point tonight. My point tonight is, let's take this education. If we now understood the actual physics of what is spirituality, which is a compelling electrical engineering physics I have dedicated my life to, then it is critical, it is essential that your doctor, your priest, your architect, the guy who designed your school, the guy who designed your medicine, and the guy who votes in your parliament, all of the above people must be informed that the health of your aura is your only hope. Hello? So if we now recognize scientifically in government that feeding your aura is probably the most important criteria that should be behind every single political decision. Hello? Would that change your government slightly, do you think? Now, the people I know that are clairvoyant, that have looked at the people who have been medically stabbed, I'm not going to use the word, but they tend to agree that people's aura tends to become detached. Hey, Joe, you look like you're beside yourself tonight. Hey, Joe, pull yourself together. So it is, there are anecdotal only reports that things like centripetal plasma, therified at night, helps people recover from the side effects of being medically stabbed. Now, the point I'm making is simple. From a strictly powerful scientific perspective, if the people who were designing your medicine knew that in order for you to get immortal, you're going to need a big aura, would that change the votes in your parliament? Would that change how they designed your kids' school? So this is my point, that we must create the education to prove scientifically that getting a big aura is the most important thing you do every day, and the most important thing the people voting in your parliament must implement. as I've been saying for how many years, that body polis defines whether the plasma field of the bees is navigable when they swarm. Literally, do they have collective bliss? Collective bliss becoming navigable is the definition, the only real definition of humans' ability to self-steer. So the definition of politics is the ability to get the bliss called body polis. Therefore, voting for bliss is the definition of successful politics electrically. Hello? What does that mean? So it means we have to teach people what a healthy aura is by measurement and how to grow it. And then we could actually make intelligent decisions about the immortality of our kids. That's why we're here tonight. Okay, was there happily ever after yet? No, but I'm working on it. Okay, so I wanted to give some examples. Now, you know that we have explained many times that the physics of what a yogi said, what a yogi means when he or she says, I'm attracting chi. They call it chi or Baraka or Shakti pot. You know, we have all these names, which is fine. But once it's understood electrically, all the names become pure principle. And that's our goal. So when they say I'm attracting chi, Baraka, or Shakti pot, what do they mean? They mean the quality of grace. What exactly is the quality of grace? And I have hundreds of times done this experiment, but you could do it with me. That if, for example, you were to move your finger in a spiral and slow down gracefully, just as you reach the center point. Let's do that again. So make a spiral. I'm moving towards center now. And slow down gracefully, just as you reach the center point. Now, if you did that correctly, you should at this moment be feeling a little bit of a tingle right at the tip of your finger. Okay? Now, it's critical that you understand the physics of what you did to make the tip of your finger tingle. In fact, in the Gurdjieff school, we were taught that you were not allowed to begin to learn the sacred gymnastic until you could put your beingness into your little baby finger in order that you could install what they called feeling there. Now, what they meant by feeling your baby finger was that you could notice that by the movement of your attention, which we now know and they didn't, that your attention is electrically centripetal. So if you can put your attention in your baby finger with enough force, so now I'm relocating the center of my attention. Therefore, I'm relocating the center of my electrical center of gravity. I relocated it. Okay, my attention has arrived in my baby finger. What just happened? My tip of my finger is getting a little bit warm now. Oh, I can feel a little tingle there, a little presence. So the capacitive implosion that you made in those two experiments is the core, essential, pure principle of the fact that the ability to accrete that charge implosion that grows the electrical field, which is cold plasma called your aura, is life or death. That's the whole point of this conversation. So the reason, for example, you do not wish to be a jerk, as we've said many times, is because when you jerk, you lose charge. So that's what the quality of grace is. Now, there's one more example that, the previous story I've told 100 times, excuse me very much. But the next story, I don't think I've ever told this story actually before. And I learned some of this from Bob Dratch at the time he was designing the microwave scanning emissions technology that should have replaced every hospital scanner on the planet, except the US military stole it and declared it a threat to national security, as usual. But what they were scanning for, you take the most important microwave frequency in the human body, adenosine diphosphate to ATP quantum distance, 1.91 angstroms, which happens to be golden ratio times Planck, which is phase conjugate charge implosive. And that microwave frequency, if you scan for that, what Bob Dratch demonstrated that day in Boulder was he scanned Wendy Thacker's spine, and sure enough, he did a graph of the history of emotional trauma of her childhood based on that microwave, because he was looking where the flame was in the spine, which is, he measured Kundalini in the microwave. Amazing. And then he took that scanner, later declared illegal by the US military, and he proved that this was the ultimate dowsing tool. So the geometry of biologic microwave is part of the flame called your aura. All microwave is not illegal. I mean, all microwave is not anti-biologic. No. The reason you don't want to sit in your microwave oven is because biology has its own beautiful microwave, actually. Now, I want to give you an example of aura science to bring that message home. And here it is. And part of this I learned from Bob Dratch, and I want to thank Bob. Microwave scanning emissions technology. It really should replace every hospital scanner in the world, because you can document the traverse of Kundalini, cellular fire, because each living cell is motorized by coherent ultraviolet blue light, the blue light special, which is sex juice. Coherent ultraviolet is the ultimate motor of cellular biophysics. And guess what it phase locks to? This microwave, ADP, ATP, the most important molecule, because every time the cell wants to store energy, it does that little teeter-totter quantum distance. So it's like the dollar bill of cell metabolism, because all transactions are based in integer units thereof. Anywho, here's a little story that makes this fun, and you can take it home with you. So Bob explained to me, he said, in terms of growing the aura, this is an example of the physics of Mudra. He said, when you hold your fingers like this versus like this, he said, when you hold your fingers like this, literally Mudra, I'm holding it now, I can feel the fire, I can feel a little flame, I can feel a little presence, I can feel that the metabolism in my hand is actually accelerating. That is a metabolic accelerator. Versus, so he said, if you wanted to speed up the flame, now he said, now if you want to slow that down, you do this, touch the middle finger. And you can feel a stabilizing, you can feel a kind of crystallization, but you don't feel implosion. Now, I meditated on that for years, trying to figure that out. I mean, figure it out. And you know what? I did figure it out. Here, the primary, now, particularly if you do it like this, if you hold it like this, I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sides. Oh, that's pent. Repent and be saved. I mean, repent and implode. I mean, the golden ratio, I mean, implode. So that's implosive versus now I hold my fingers like this. Now count the number of sides. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's hex. Now hex stabilizes because it generates ratios based on octave. So that is crystallizing, visualize snowflakes, versus pent implodes. And that implosive non-destructive charge collapse is charge acceleration. Now, the reason that this works is because you're actually cohering the harmonics, among other things, of a microwave field. Those same frequencies of microwave predict why insects navigate according to the radiance of the carvings on the pyramid walls, which are microwave antenna. And those same microwave antenna actually propagate human bliss, which is why Earth grid is profoundly symbiotic and conductive to that 1.91 angstrom cellular microwave, because this is how the DNA radio, which is, we now know phase conjugate, we've got all the pictures. So the DNA radio of the microwave emitted by a living cell, the adenine diphosphate to triphosphate, is actually implosive phase conjugate, precisely tuned to Planck and photosynthesis. And the Earth grid is measurably symbiotic to human biologic microwave, which of course every indigenous shaman knew for, I mean, yes, this is why they call them song lines, because, and dreaming track, because this is the road of ancestral memory along the coherent, we now know as dodecacosa longitudinal interferometric grid array. So now you have some little tools to think about how your aura is generated. Now that you know that getting that aura to be big is life or death. Now I have some more notes here about other examples. I'm going to talk about religion, astral hygiene thing. But any questions or comments so far? Should we a little less monologue, a little more dialogue? Anybody?
I loved the Mudra comparison, and I can actually feel the effects. So I encourage anybody that's watching this to follow along with Dan and the group as we do that. I was wondering if that, because I practiced yoga, and I wonder if all the hand gestures that you can practice through meditation, could you be explaining what you just explained, but with all the different ones? I'm not too sure if you're familiar with them, but
well,
quite a
yeah,
few.
there's many, and I haven't analyzed enough of them. But I know, for example, when you lay your hands on your knees during a tetrahedral fire breath meditation, for example, so you've got your hands like this, but you're on your knees. And then you arrange your knees and your tailbone and the crown so that they make a perfect tetrahedron, sometimes called the tetrahedral fire breath. You're making a long wave geometry. And that's why in the Merkaba meditation, for example, we said that it's very good to begin with the visualization of the counter spinning tetra, because that's what a cube is, and you're incubating your aura. However, as we explain at goldenmean.info/Merkaba, MERKABBAH, that if you finish your meditation with that tetrahedral mudra, and you do not complete the circuit, unfortunately, you're a bit more susceptible to astral parasites, because the tetracubic symmetry, which we now know generates only octave powers of 2 ratio, which we know is maximum destructive interference for waves, snowflakes, for example, which is perfect for stabilizing and the opposite of charge distribution and charge implosion. So hex is perfect, as any witch can tell you. I'm going to put a hex on you. Well, what she means is she's going to stabilize that field and prevent it from changing. Whereas when she puts a pentacle on you, so the climax part of that meditation that was suggested, so people who left that tetracubic meditation and did not complete it, unfortunately, reported many, many astral hygiene problems. And incidentally, astral hygiene is the next subject to be discussed on my little list this evening. Versus when you take that cube and you do the chin angle of the Sphinx, 32 degrees, which is exactly the angle you tilt the cube up in order to rotate it, blink 5 times, and you have a pent dodeca. So you went from hex to pent. And at the moment when you visualize pent instead of hex, implosion begins. Now, Drunvalo, for example, taught correctly that that last step could be dangerous. And yes, it can, because if you're not ready to implode, you're going to get dizzy. The way you prepare for pent is the same way you prepare for bliss and death. And that is, you need to become a shareable wave to be compressible, because that's how you will be accelerated at bliss and death. So you check, hello, am I a shareable wave today? Let me go down my list. Do I have any anger? Do I have any unresolved? Oh yeah. Am I ready for death? No. So this is the checklist you have. It's sort of like a bucket list, really. This is the checklist before you go from hex to pen. Anyway, that would be one other example of a conversation about mudra. And I'm sure we could analyze more of them, but I haven't done that homework yet, really.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So the questions we have are exactly the ones that you're going to be touching on in the next part of your lecture. But I've got the questions of, well, what happened 500 years ago? Why is it that that's when the Andromedans say that religions became obsolete?
Yeah, I've asked that question. I don't really have an answer. I'm just guessing that science may have reached something close to a threshold where we had actual scientific information to inform us how to charge our aura and thus get immortal, to become sacred, okay? So at a certain point, and I think that's a very subjective date, and the date is probably not that important, but at a certain point, the species has enough information to understand the physics of spirituality so that they no longer need the immaturity of personality and miracle worship, which is also poison because it causes wars. but they can also see that the only thing that's actually immortal is the pure principle. And that's why you feel a eureka and your hair stands up, because you thought a shareable wave, which was implosive. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly what was 5. I mean, I bet if you went back in history, you could probably figure out that, well, you know, the scientific revolution had just begun or something, but I haven't really done the study.
Well, yeah, and in addition to everything that you're saying about all the the base architects of our society, from the medical institutions, the political, everything that's the foundation of our society, it's almost as if there was a point where they just decided to pursue one path of science, one path of ideology that was actually going to create this nihilistic perspective, this materialistic foundation that nothing matters in the universe, that you're not connected, that there is no God, it's all the Big Bang and random. And it seems like all of that might have been consciously created just to try to separate us, make us beside ourselves. And now here we are with the medical, arm stuff that, as you're saying, actually is shown to make people lose their plasma bodies.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, we have the perception, sadly, that the study of science led to soullessness. I mean, that's basically what it seems that our pursuit of science is making us soulless. Oh my God, that's scary. But there's another way to look at it. Now, if science evolves, if electrical engineers like me evolve to the point where we can describe meaningfully by measurement in a shareable way what it is to have a soul, hello, maybe we can fix this problem. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And specifically, now we believe, after we prove that Therify.net makes longitudinal waves and replicably triggers lucid dreaming, which we know you can prove predicts whether you'll take memory through death. And we've been through that conversation many times. So we absolutely know what it is about your aura that becomes sustainable. Your aura implodes, the cascade of charge goes down those perfect cone vortex, side view, caduceus, and the transverse inertia becomes longitudinal as it's squirted out the squirt gun at the center of the vortex cone, pine cones, kissing noses, called the Planck threshold. And at that point, the transverse wave becomes compressional or longitudinal, enabling you to inhabit that array. And now we can prove that's how you trigger lucid dreaming. Hello, are we close to knowing what it is to have a soul? Let's see, we can prove what triggers lucid dream. We can make the electric field that feeds your aura, the care and feeding of the human aura. And we can prove that that's a lucid dreaming trigger. And we can prove with lots of anecdotal, at least, that the ability to lucid dream is what you're going to take with coherence at the moment of death, because you had a big aura. Suddenly, are we closer for electrical engineers to teach at university the physics of what it is to have a soul? Ooh, we might be close. Now, if we were, could we then say that science finally, oh my God, is no longer soulless? Wouldn't that be a relief?
I love what you said about basically vote for bliss.
Yeah,
like that. That could be a new campaign.
The body polis, the biologic definition of polis is the coherence of the plasma of your aura that makes you self-navigable. The same reason the bees will not swarm until they have royal blood and collective bliss. In other words, making that plasma cocoon navigable, that was called body polis. Hint, origin of the term politics, meaning once we have group bliss, then we are collectively steerable. I think that's
and okay. That's interesting because steerable and maybe manipulated, or maybe that's the opposite when you actually.
Well, see, that's what we're saying is that once you begin to charge implode, sometimes called bliss, so the implosion precedes the radiance called bliss. Once you begin to charge implode, you are then able to attract your own charge, meaning that's the first time you are not a parasite. Meaning until you have your own source of bliss, you're looking for charge from everybody around you. You're a little dependent. You're not self-navigating. Once you've located your own source of bliss, which is your own source of charge, you're no longer a parasite with respect to your environment. So you are your own source of charge. And therefore, by definition, You are your own source of navigation. The only actual biologic definition of freedom. You want to teach what freedom is politically?
That's hilarious. Like I've been in a lot of protests lately as the climate that we're in, and people love to just say freedom, freedom, freedom.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to these people. I'm like, what do you even mean by that? What? So there we go. We have our answers.
Well,
Before we,
well, just to
sorry,
say
yeah.
that chemists talk about degrees of freedom for a reaction, which just means how many different variables are not fixed in that reaction in which it can grow by temperature or pressure, whatever it is. But degrees of freedom for the human aura is identical with what we taught in the physics of ascension, which is the number of harmonics in your DNA and in your bliss EEG determine how many axes of charge symmetry are superposed, which is literally how many dimensions you live in. Hint, ascend to the next dimension, because we need the space. So that implosion of harmonic inclusiveness defines going to the next dimension and how many of axes of spin symmetry you can unpack and are free into, setting you free. Really sets you free, man. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I was just going to say, we've got 2 questions before you proceed with the next part of your lecture, if that's all right.
Sure.
One question from Rena is asking about the scanner. I think it was from Bob Dratch. What was the name of that? And could you repeat the story of that?
Bob's a great guy. You know, we had fun with him with Yurka when we were doing Transcom, what became Gaia TV. And he's an old friend, and we really honor his genius. But basically, he had been evolving microwave scanning emission technology. It was called microwave scanning emissions technology. And he used a gold foil microwave pickup, a super high power microwave amp. And knowing the frequency to tune that to, hint, is multiple, but main key one would be adenosine diphosphate, 1.91 angstroms, which I later proved is golden ratio times Planck, meaning ATP is phase conjugate negentropic, exactly the way I proved the only 2 frequencies of light that make photosynthesis are exactly golden ratio times Planck for the same reason. So if you scan the spine for that microwave, you get a map of where the Kundalini has gone in your body. Isn't that cool? Yes, it was too bad the military told Bob that if he ever even told anybody about it for the next 20 years, he'd go to jail. Welcome to America.
All right, thank you. And Nils, you can ask your question if you want.
Great, thank you. So I heard a lot about orgasm while meditating and also while lucid dreaming. Could you tell me a little about that, please?
And are we asking sexy questions today? Well, I'm double Scorpio, so we never apologize for staying. We enjoy it. The physics of Kundalini, and if I may, please do the ad, goldenmean.info/Kundalini for the professional films. But the physics of Kundalini, in part, is the ultraviolet and microwave coherence of, in the male, the sperm, for example, which we now know, in fact, the tailbone opens and becomes a straw. That really sucks. And that suction of that straw down the tailbone can draw a subcomponent of, and the sperm will actually, in the case of male, in some cases, literally go up the spine. The only thing remains is the milk, but without the sperm. And the reason it goes up the spine, really burns, doesn't it? Is because that is part of the physics. It's that ultraviolet microwave coherent which is delivered to the brain crown. And of course, it is highly erotic. And in my case, it was. And it's very possible to go nuts at that point, for sure. So to remain stable. So as any rabbi can tell you, when you're a kid, conserve your sex juices. But he didn't tell you why. Well, if you're able to conserve and send that charge up the spine liquid pump, but there are many caveats to that. First of all, it has to flow. But it's true, if you get in the habit of dissipating your sexual energy, then it'll never build the pressure to move. So there's a whole conversation about one of the reasons the Catholic Church is obsolete is because they didn't understand that, actually, that the ability of the sexual energy to drive the bliss circuit. And in the female, it's part of the parthenogenesis physics of virgin birth, for example, that it's actually capacitance that splits the egg. Because that's what initiates the dimpling process, which is the physics of how a sphere egg becomes a zygote, it's literally the 7 stages of invagination, which is the turning inside out process. The sequence of symmetry operations of that 7 turns inside out is actually the shadows of the word Bereshith, first word of Genesis. At first, in principle, the origin of thingness was actually the physics of turning inside out ness, which is how charge creates birth by initiating dimpling. But so it's a very sexy conversation, no question. And then, you have the whole ventricle horns of Moses and Lucifer, which is the completion of the phonon geometry of the Kundalini circuit, which is plasma projection. And that enabling of the ventricle liquids to crystallize is the phonon component of the sacrocranial physics of Kundalini. But that's all at that goldenmean.info/Kundalini. But that is a little bit about your question, yes?
Yes, so there isn't that much difference in between male and female, or
well, the suggestion was, and I think maybe this was more poetic then, but the suggestion was that the female center of gravity is lower in general, and ability to be grounded is greater. So in the case of the female, you're more likely to inhabit the earth and the grid, whereas in the case of the male, less fractal. The eggs are far more fractal than seeds. And so in the case of the male, the Kundalini is more explosive. And so the male potentially, poetically, has more potential to experience separateness and to go insane, actually, but also can project further. So if you don't go insane as a male, you may be able to go further, but the female has the privilege of being more fractal and therefore more immortal. The mitochondrial of the female will track back to Eve. Male, no, not so much. So there's some fun differences in there, and that makes it interesting.
So is that something you would, recommend to explore?
Well, a lot of conversation in our Kundalini, goldenmean.info/Kundalini article about that. But as in my friend at that time, Lisa Nolla's book, Kundalini, Psychosis or Transcendence, one of the reasons it's most commonly diagnosed as psychosis is because it is dangerous, actually. It is explosive. It's a rapid train to unpacking the aura, but also, part of that sound current, that phonon geometry, we've measured the ringing in the ears heard by meditators, the same ringing my partner knows is ancestor phone calls. And yes, you could hear voices. I became clairaudient. I'm not good at it, but I am clairaudient. And to remain sane through that process requires grounding. It requires understanding enough of the science so that you don't lose it. So yeah, it is dangerous. Basically, after the Gurdjieff school, they told us correctly, go back and prove you can return to society before you go nuts. When you start having bliss process to remain grounded, it's similar to therapy in that sense. You need get the book Earthing, in the water, phase locked, because grounding is access to fractality, which is phase locked to the earth for both electricians and psychologists, which means that gives you phase reference to embed in your environment and thus not lose it, to lose sense of reference. So it's dangerous, but powerful. It's the short answer. And that kind of bliss process actually is almost functionally identical to Daniel Brinkley's 2 books of what happened to him after he got struck by lightning twice. Yes, that was a near-death experience. Everybody he touched, he saw their whole life of emotions. He became a superconductor, and it was risky. The movie Powder. So in order to inhabit a lightning bolt, the first lesson is that the first thought you have, which is not shareable, will generate heat. And I spent months, if not years, crying. Okay.
I have a quick follow-up question. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Please, this is fun. This is fun.
So what would happen, when one could not control that in general, that phenomena?
Even in my case, I feel my metabolism getting too hot. The top of my head will burn to the point of, and that will, at that moment when I'm lying on a ley line, I lie still, I finish the breathing, and I haven't got a full stomach, and hopefully I'm fairly together. And I can feel that lightning penetrate, and I close my eyes and I can look up the mountain ley line and I can see the pictures. I can see what's on the magnetic line. And that intensity, that lightning inside burns blood sugar almost out of control and ignites metabolism almost out of control. I can think fast enough to analyze almost any problem, but if I start analyzing a problem and I lose my grounding and sense of reference, you can lose it very quickly. So that is part of what drove me to this need to understand everything in terms of pure principle. Otherwise, so when it gets out of control, I mean, let me put it this way. In my class at the Gurdjieff community, claymont.org, approximately 1/4 to 1/3 of the class literally was transported to the nut house. And I can tell you that the women in that group, there was intense bliss, no question. The women in that group, first they noticed that they began ovulating together. I think there were about 20 of us, something like that. And then they noticed that their rate of ovulation increased to the point of averaging almost double.
Impressive.
So powerful but dangerous. And you know, a lot of people's nervous system isn't ready for that, and that's okay. I mean, you don't need intense bliss. You need a way to attract a reasonable amount of charge to be stable and do your life purpose. But gradually you become more aware then of ancestral memory and therefore soul purpose. And soul purpose is the wind of your ancestors. It's the yearning at the moment of death of your ancestors. And that is the wind in your sails. Any Aboriginal could tell you. And so as you get close to that plasma density, so the next, any other thoughts? Actually, the questions are more fun than what I had prepared anyway, so whatever.
Another question that we have is if you have a map of the quote unquote real ley lines of Earth.
Some of that, goldenmean.info/geobiology. I could be digging out, I have lots of pictures, but if we dug out pictures, that would take the whole night. But also in our main PowerPoint, and I have hundreds, but the main PowerPoint, goldenmean.info/PowerPoint, you will see the dodecaecosa Earth grid, famously from Anti-Gravity in the World Grid by Becker and Huygens, both of whom were close friends. Later, dodecaecosa, which was documented by Bruce Cathy to be the same nodes at which nuclear critical mass was dramatically affected, and later documented by Kozyrev to be where military quality telepathy was possible. Now we know the reason every pyramid was on that nodal array, which is longitudinal, was because that was a fully functional global wireless power distribution without wires grid, actually. So, and it was measurable when the Kozyrev people installed the Kozyrev mirror, which by the way is microwave, that cylinder, metal cylinder Kozyrev mirror with all the telepathy measurements. That was a coherent microwave. And they would get the military quality telepathy only if first, before they installed, they measured the nanotesla flux density, proving you're on an Earth grid magnetic line crosspoint. They made the measurement. This was not subjective. So there's lots of pictures there. I suppose we could dig out some pictures. But...
Well, no, I'm sure that we can find the references and discuss that in our next community Zoom call about geobiology, fractalfield.com. Well, one of the questions that we had is also essentially what you're going to be talking about next, of the practical methods of astral hygiene and having your aura. So you could either continue on with that, or then I do have some more questions that are kind of things that I've been thinking about outside of this lecture topic, but I definitely want to ask them. So it's up to you if you want me to ask them now or wait until you've covered.
Let me, since we have the enthusiasm, let me just, the next thoughts about astral hygiene. I wanted to use the example of walking into a bar versus a church. The astral hygiene of walking into a bar versus a church. Now, most people know the reason you want to be careful when you walk into a bar. Any clairvoyant can tell you, if you walk into most bars and you're clairvoyant, you see these plasma worms all over the place, obviously astral parasites crawling into and out of people. So you want to be a little careful when you walk in a bar if you have some sense of astral hygiene. The physics is that obviously addiction, especially alcohol and recreational drugs to some extent, produce holes in the aura. And we recommend when your kids ask for recreational drugs that you measure the holes in the aura, GDV, and tell them it's not subjective. And the reason holes in the aura are messy and dangerous, among other things, is susceptibility to astral parasites, these plasma worms that love going in and inside of people and sucking, they call it the loosh. Now, the physics of why, for example, alcohol produces holes in the aura, basically, what makes your aura not have holes? Many good examples in the GDV literature, some of which are at auraseer.com, A-U-R-A-S-E-E-R, auraseer.com, which is a website I maintain for our partner, Lucy, who is trained in Russia with the GDV. And so you can see some examples. But basically, the physics of when and why your aura gets holes is, and this is Astral Hygiene 101, and this is central to the conversation about the care and feeding of the human aura. The reason your aura gets holes is it's not just centripetal force, but it's centripetal symmetry, which makes your aura coherent. I give you an example. If you're mixing 2 and 4 lasers in exactly symmetric opposite directions, and the symmetry has to be angstrom level accurate, then the light will implode, and that's called phase conjugate optics. And that's the first time they measured negentropy and time reversal. So the reason that symmetry made it centripetal was because that compressional wave arriving in opposing directions exactly in symmetry enabled implosion. So if there wasn't symmetry, there would be holes in that plasma field, in that aura. So the symmetry in your aura means that your intent, your thought, your habits need to have symmetry. And obviously, if you have accelerated asymmetrically certain parts of your attention using alcohol, for example, or recreational drugs, the alcohol deprives the brain of oxygen, temporarily increasing conductivity, resulting in a reduction in inhibition. And that is addictive because in part, the alcohol-induced oxygen reduction, because the alcohol molecule literally replaces the receptor for the oxygen in the brain, meaning that the brain becomes more conductive, reduced inhibition, however, not symmetrically. In other words, holes in the aura means your attention was not symmetric. So same thing with LSD or, a lot of drugs, that yes, you got this major squirt of attention in one direction or another, but it wasn't self-generated. It wasn't self-empowering. Therefore, it was not symmetric. Therefore, you couldn't maintain that from within for yourself. Therefore, your aura got holes in it asymmetrically. And again, that's very measurable with GDV. Kids who have addiction, you can measure the holes in the aura, but I'm just saying where they come from and why that's an example, a good example of astral hygiene, and why the people in the bar have more holes in their aura than others. Now, what about walking into a church? Our partners, we believe the most advanced geobiologists in Europe, if not the planet, Stefan Cardinal and Jan Lipnik, also we must credit here in France, goldenmean.info/geobiology, did a lot of work doing the geomagnetic mapping of churches. And there's many examples in his book, and Valerie translated one of those books. It's wonderful work. But what they concluded, and they actually saw the parasitic beings, is that unfortunately, many people, in effect, go to church because they badly need their aura eaten. I repeat, many people go to church because unconsciously they're looking for a place to have their aura eaten. Could that be cathartic in the sense of catharsis? I mean, cathartic in the sense, yes. For the same reason some people waste their sexual energy. You need some place to put it. Well, the point is that, so there are some churches that have lots of astral parasites. I'm not saying all churches, but I'm saying, but they saw really messy really messy, large astral plasma parasites. And some of the pictures are at goldenmean.info/geobiology, and you don't like those critters. But the point being, whether it's, am I drawing an analog between a bar and a church here? Well, no. The word church, by the way, C-H-U-R-C-H. C-H means l'chaim. It means literally alchemy. It means access to a black hole. That's what the word CH means in Hebrew. And UR means of the ancient dragon blood, meaning ancient Draco culture, which is both the good guys and the bad guys. They're Uru. So a church is a black hole for dragons coming in and out of black holes. That's what it is. Well, what it means is it's a place of plasma implosion. It could be the beginnings of a stargate. It could be the beginnings of a temple. It could be the beginnings of what they call raising a Shem unto the Lord, mistranslated to be meaning raising an altar in a church. Actually, to raise a Shem means to make an electric field that reduces aging, literally rejuvenation. So Therify.net is a Shem unto the Lord. But the point was that, so I got this little charged black hole here, if that church was well designed, and people come there to plasma project their aura. And if it's working well, they get a bit of a stargate and they get enabled bliss, and it's probably beautiful. But if it's not working well, if astral hygiene is not there, eventually many parasites can build up there. Meaning, I found in my own personal experience that every time I go into a church, I really check with my inner voice, my intuition. And your inner voice, your intuition works better and better the more you have the discipline of bliss experience, because your radio to the collective plasma starts working. Okay. So that was a little bit on astral hygiene of buildings. So
sorry if I can just interject. So in addition to church, the etymology root there, I recently have learned about a cathedral, where a cathode, the idea that a cathedral was actually a place where it could protect you from electrical storms. And this is going into the electric universe model, the Thunderbolts project. Maybe you've heard of them, but that's really interesting, the parallel of like what these words actually mean.
Yeah, and it was a beautiful question. And, you know, I spent some time researching the origin of the term cathedral. Another definite parallel there is the word catheter, which is access to blood, you see. In a cathedral, if you look at Macha Mandir, for example, it is the shape of a virus. And the reason the virus looks like a screw, like you're really screwed if you get a virus, is because it screws and embeds its way into a grid. So a virus is a helical screw for a very important biological region. And Macha Mandir looks like a virus, a screw, the sacred cathedral, which acts then as a catheter, ex cathedra, for the blood, the plasma, which is the life force. So the embedding of the screw shape of the cathedral, which is the ability to embed it, is very cathartic. I mean, it's a catheter. I mean, well, the other important meaning is ex cathedra also means from the place of the chair, as in the chairman, which actually means from the place where there is a leverage on the grid from the point of view of the throne of the royal crown, which is, you know, the crowning ceremony is always made, you know, at Aix-en-Provence, or Aix means the place of the magnetic line crosses here in France, AIX. And this is where they crown the kings, because Arthur and the land are one. And if he has coherent emotion, then there will be a legal limit to the snow in Camelot. So at the moment at which they put the crown on the king, where his chair is on the grid in the cathedral, well, because his aura must inhabit the land or the climate will go into chaos. And that's good physics, because he produces the long wave centripetal force, which is how your climate and your politics, body polypolis, emerges from chaos, quite literally. So the function of royal blood, ultimately, you know, the purple and the whole thing, is if they can inhabit the magnetic field of the whole kingdom, ex cathedra, the place of the chair, the chairman. And by the way, when they put the crown on his head, if he's thinking perfectly shareable thoughts, he will inhabit that kingdom and he will control the rain as Tutankhamun was required. But if he's angry at that moment, he will go nuts faster when they put the crown on him. Was that a happily ever after yet? Not quite.
That was wonderful. Yeah. Wow.
Well, so there's just a few more notes here, and then we can kind of finish with questions maybe. But the notes also suggest how important it was to recognize why depression also puts holes in the aura, as in care and feeding of your aura. And that is, depression means effectively you've forgotten the reason you're living, purpose or intent, which means you can't provide reference or a shareable wave or a context, and therefore you can't steer your own aura. So it's quite obvious. And this becomes very serious when, for example, when the Draco supposedly learned how to abduct human souls, and they supposedly could do it in seconds. It really is messy. But the point being that the first and most susceptible ones, when Rupert Murdoch, we don't want to go there, but were the ones who were susceptible to alcohol or depression. Those are the ones who are most susceptible to having their soul snatched, actually. So you can see how important it is to maintain a coherent aura, which access to bliss. And if you have an issue with depression, how dangerous actually that is to the porosity of the aura. And we have a whole section on biofeedback for depression and biofeedback for addiction at flameandmind.com. And there are videos there about addiction and depression. But basically, it was quite simple. If you make the alpha beta in your brainwave, which is implosive, flame and mind, and literally bliss, and that's measurable, it makes you able to see without your eyes by measurement as well. And those are literally, specifically the Schumann harmonics, alpha beta brainwaves perfected are the Schumann harmonics, which means imploding into negentropy with Gaia. And when you can do that, you get centripetal enough and your aura becomes symmetric and you can navigate. And the alternatives are dire, actually. That's the sort of point here. So there is something about the biofeedback mechanics of depression versus bliss.
And depression, that sounds like the opposite of compression.
It's interesting. When you're depressed, you probably don't have a center, and therefore compression is probably disabled. That's a useful way of thinking about it, I assume. That whereas if you know, we have all these metaphors as, you know, you're the center of my heart, darling. Well, it means you're the center of my intent, my focus, my purpose, and what I've identified with. And phi makes the perfect dent, so that's identify. And identify is turning inside out, among other things. So the next notes here are about very simple, practical thoughts about, we talked about grounding, that the book Earthing is the best example I think there is of the importance of grounding. It means, what that means in practice is thick rubber sneakers are probably bad news because they isolate you from ground, actually, and unhealthy. And metal rebar in your floor is serious bad news. It isolates you from ground, and it's classic. Any dancer knows that if you're dancing on concrete, there's metal rebar on the floor, your feet are going to feel horrible within minutes. Whereas if you're dancing on wood, but the physics of why that's true is the capacitance of charge distribution efficiency, which defines biologic architecture. That wood, biologic material, is a high dielectric, means capacitance can unpack efficiently, whereas the steel rebar in that concrete floor that's killing you is the opposite. It has a very low dielectric, which means charge cannot distribute, means the charge of your feet is dissipated immediately. And by the way, if you want to operate healing plasma like Therify and other devices, if you set the Tesla coil on a floor that has rebar in it, it don't work. Oh, it's because the capacitance bleeds. The charge is in the corona. That's where it travels, not in the Tesla coil. So that's why also that the healing effect of negative ion wind, which is profound, identical with the plasma Therify, is inhibited if there's too much metal in the environment because it bleeds the capacitance. So this is an introduction to the architecture section of aura maintenance. So essentially what it says is As we always say, when Luke Skywalker needed to become a Jedi and project his plasma, he didn't do it in a metal building. Cannot happen. No, he went deep into nature, and in that environment, plasma was projectable, which defines the Jed in Jedi, plasma projection. So if you would like to be a Jedi Knight, get the hell out of the poisonous metal city building and poisonous electrosmog and dead air and go somewhere where plasma is projectable, Mr. Jedi. So this is all a rationale for biologic architecture, and the curriculum is beautiful at bioarchitects.net and goldenmean.info/architecture. And that is the background behind peaceuniversity.net, which is where we showed that if the magnetic lines break between village A and village B, you can predict in advance this is going to cause war. I mean, it's been measured. Vukovar, Israel, Yugoslavia, Ireland. You break the magnetic lines between the villages. This is a measurable correlate to the onset of war. It's been proven. This is Phil Callahan's life. And conversely, when they went to Vukovar after the underground water disappeared after the war, and they restored the magnetic lines, they put in some labyrinths, did some geomagnetic, and suddenly the underground water came up to the surface in exactly the same way that if you touch your lover and she loves you, then her skin will turn pink because her blood likes you. This is why the water returned to that surface. That is called the physics of teaching peacemaking, where peacemaking is only defined by which electric field becomes centripetal and negentropic, called peace. And you can teach peacemaking in the heart and in the brainwaves and in geobiology and if you understand the origin of any centripetal negentropic force, then you could then define peacemaking electrically. Until then, but sadly, current physics doesn't know why anything's centripetal, so they got a problem. Okay, other notes here had to do with the lights we talked about. I've spoken to this so many times, but remember, you restore the sunlight or sunlight frequencies to your child's classroom, the book Health and Light by John Ott, in terms of aura maintenance, and you can measure dramatic increase in attention span. Very good example that the reason sunlight causes attention span measurably is because the phase conjugate frequencies of sunlight and photosynthesis are implosive centripetal, the definition of attention. So obviously, if you got the wrong frequencies in your children's classroom lighting, you ain't going to get attention. And that also then applies to the Wi-Fi and the electrosmog that's killing your. When we turn the Wi-Fi on here, I feel nausea immediately. I'm speaking to you through an Ethernet cable, not Wi-Fi, just to be clear. And so there's all that whole conversation. And 5G, we talked about the 60 gigahertz of 5G probably inhibits oxygen solubility in blood and water and many issues in nature. And that, eating fried food at McDonald's, what did that have? No, just that the oil has the wrong dielectric and therefore, so then we get to the whole diet section here. And actually the hygiene for bliss, the hygiene for aura maintenance was the subject of one of my first books, which we called Conscious Kids. It's Implosion, Secret Science of Ecstasy and Immortality. And the complete book PDF, which is the whole book is about the hygiene for bliss, the hygiene for growing an aura. And the whole book free, it's beautiful. It's also on Amazon, but you can download the whole color PDF, goldenmean.info/conscious kids. So you see, we actually, years ago, spent a lot of time putting together a hygiene practices for growing an aura, expressed in terms intensively and intently for young people. We start with the bliss hygiene of movement, which we've talked about today about yoga, etc. And then we talked about the bliss hygiene of environment, the architecture. And then we talked about the bliss hygiene of pure intent. That is, if you spend your day realizing that every single thought needs to be a shareable wave, so an indicator that you've accomplished this is when you go to bed at night, you play your life day backwards like a movie. And if you can do it without interrupting, it means you've digested your day, which means it's ready for compression, insertion into the collective mind. And therefore, at that moment, you're ready for bed and bliss and death, because that's what made your day compressible, and therefore shareable, and therefore immortal. So the ability to emotionally digest your day into a shareable wave. So at the end of that digestion process of every event of your day, so that you're no longer angry at anybody, because you understand everybody who apparently seems to have hurt you really had this intent, because so now you really understand deeply what was behind the pain, and therefore you're not angry at anybody. Therefore, you've digested your day. Therefore, you're ready for bed and bliss and death, which are all the same, really, which is surviving compression, which is why they always said, don't go to bed angry. Don't die angry, please. Ooh, messy, messy. Okay, so this is some of the hygiene practices. And so we had 3 categories. Now, originally we had 4. So we for maintaining a healthy aura, which was movement, environment, the psyche, which is learning the discipline of seeing every event in your life as containing something about pure principle. And when you seek that in every event in your life, and you distill the purpose, the magic, the mystery of every deep event that happened to you, the pure principle behind it, then you've distilled it into a form which serves the collective survival memory library called Akashic Records, Communion of Saints, ancestor memory. That is a compression field of survival information which propagates in that fractal array. So again, we had environment, the psyche, the movement, and the last category that we discuss in that book is the diet. And we can go into some of that here. Basically, you need living water. You need to, probably the majority of your diet needs to be live food. You probably need to recognize why you get a huge amount of mucus when you eat most dairy or grain, particularly wheat, because the DNA in that grain, that wheat, for example, has spent probably several hundred generations in monoculture, which makes that DNA in that wheat about as angry as a little boy whose last 10 generations of fathers were in jail. So that little boy is going to be pissed off. And that's exactly what the DNA in that wheat is telling you when you stick it on your tongue and you get mucus, 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 because your body is saying, not self, not self, not self, anger, 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 versus the sacred corn of the Hopi that would only grow if you sang the right song. And I saw that cornmeal call the wind, and I know the physics. That was a happy DNA. But you can't find that corn anymore. You're not going to buy that down at Kmart, unfortunately. So once you understand the physics of why that DNA is causing mucus, because it's your body necessarily saying there's pain in the memory. So it embed in that DNA. So basically what it means is you walk into the bio co-op and you're deciding what to eat, and you whisper to the broccoli, when was the last time you knew genetic diversity? And that will tell you which broccoli and which bread you can eat. Now, we had an heirloom seeds garden, as I say many times, installed by the Seneca at my farm, Crystal Hill in Western New York. And all my friends who used to, they liked their LSD occasionally, I think. They didn't actually say that, by the way. But they emphasized that when they had the vegetables from the heirloom seeds garden the Seneca put in next to the labyrinth at my farm, they all agreed that those vegetables were better than LSD. Every one of them. They said, close your eyes, you saw visions, man. And we had like 10 different color beans and 10 different color potatoes. I mean, it was extreme genetic diversity, heirloom seeds plus, 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 plus. And so this was happy DNA. Can you find that in your garden? Okay, my voice is getting a little worn out here. I'm happy to do a few questions, or as you think.
Thank you. That's that's going to be very valuable. I think diet is completely underrated, and that's something that all these light bulbs are going off in my head, thinking about what I've been going through and people in my life are going through and pains and all that. And it's like, what are we eating? Pretty much what you're talking about. Don't eat. And I love the analogy of the young boy whose father's been in jail for generations, and that's what you're putting into your body. Wow.
That's the DNA in that wheat. And dairy, most of dairy is the same. Those cows were not happy, sadly.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Thank you so much. So yeah, if anybody's got any questions relevant to the lecture, feel free to send them my way. But we do have a question that is asking about, do the Dracos operate something akin to a CT scanner to abduct a soul and insert it in a body and send it back to Earth to keep us in the system? And that's relevant to questions that I wanted to ask you. So that's a good segue, actually.
I thought we were looking for a happily ever after. Now we got Dracos. Oops. No, but really, the hope here is Elena Danaan, and I choose to believe she's right, and I'm doing an interview with her next week. She says that the Galactic Federation, the Andromedans, the Arcturians, and 1,000 other cultures just got together and booted the Draco Siakar and the Nebu and the parasitic grays right out of the solar system. Dun, dun, dun. Now, there are a few little minor details, like when you get a tick out of your arm, it doesn't mean the problem's over, but it's still encouraging. And then I actually received a question in my email today saying, well, if thinking pure intent is what gets you a powerful aura, then how come Dracos have a powerful enough aura to make a vice-like grip? Where they're so messed up. So in other words, is it possible to have a big aura and not have pure intent? And the short version of the answer is that, you know, the Dracos they've been militaristic for, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of years. And so the direction of their yearning has made their auras very powerful. But on the other hand, it is clear the Draco admit themselves that they have lost long-term memory, what we call a soul. And that brings us hopefully to your question, which is what they're scanning for is the genetic raw material to make what we would call a soul, exactly what they don't have. Literally Humpty Dumpty's egg, all the king's horses couldn't put. They massaged the royal families in Europe for thousands of years, just like we do show dogs, and they still didn't put Humpty Dumpty, a soul back together again. So what it means to not have a soul, as indicated by loss of long-term memory and ability to take memory through death. And by the way, they admit they forgot how to die. Hello, is that a clue? So yeah, when they were scanning for who to abduct, you know, we don't know all the details on this, but we have some pretty good ideas after Eisenhower got sucked via MJ-12 into the treaty with the wrong parasitic ET, the Nebu, and Laura Eisenhower, a friend, and Elena have described in detail. What happened was the Greys then, being paid by the Draco and others, 90% of whom they abducted, we believe, had some indigenous blood. Who was that? You know, and we think we think the reason they were abducting mostly some indigenous blood was because they were lucid dreamers. And why did they abduct the lucid? Well, the same lucid dreamers that they abducted for the secret space program. Every time it's the same. They were looking for a soul. They were looking how to make DNA that could bend the light. Remember when Sufi said, only love bends the light, therefore only love creates. What did they mean? Only embeddability creates that centripetal force. Lo-fi. So anywho, when we say, could they scan for, obviously what they were looking for was the kind of DNA that could make a little black hole. And you get the same story from my friends who were abducted for the Montauk Project. Almost every one of them were psychokinetic lucid dreamers in some form, indirectly Preston Nichols and Dunkels. And I knew all those guys at Montauk. And Charlie the Draco, who mostly ran the Montauk Project, he could not himself steer the time chair. Implosive dodeca, deca delta, you know, the dodeca in the movie Contact, which was what Montauk was behind. That was an implosive attempt to restore the ability to steer the timelines. And the lucid dreamers could do it, and the Draco could not, at least the low-end ones. The Siakar are the royalty, and that's a bit of another story. So that is too long a story to deal with tonight, and more of that when we do the interview with Elena Danaan. But point being that, indeed, for a time, the Draco were more psychokinetic than the humanoids. Early in the galactic Orion Wars, sometimes called Wars of Expansion or Oxygen Wars, from Lyra and Vega, eventually through Pleiades and Orion to Earth. But now, the humanoids, and there are tens, if not at least hundreds of thousands of humanoid civilizations in this galactic sector, definitely, and the humanoids are winning. That's the good news. So we have gotten a critical amount of leverage. And the difference is knowing what a soul is. That is the difference in the whole war. It's the difference between surviving the attack of the AI that took over the Umites and the Black Goo that took over all of the sub-royal Draco bloodlines, if you believe Johann Fritz, who lectured on my YouTube channel. So that's a very big story, and we can only tell part of it. But again, the story to that, Maury, is the physics of what makes a soul, and it's the only way not to get sucked into the AI.
Wow, yeah. Thank you, Dan. Yeah, there's so much of this information is all on your website. I've spent hours and hours looking through fractalfield.com. There's so many different resources, and even you recommended today, auraseer.com, peaceuniversity.net. There are so many dots that are being connected for me personally as we're talking about this, and the idea that we have, like, society has been manipulated for a very, very long time. And especially when you said that when the magnetic breaking the magnetic lines between villages causes war, it's like that's a whole new level of kinetic warfare or psychological warfare. And it's not even like the nuclear karma stuff that we're talking about last lecture, but how easy people can be manipulated by just, could you give an example of how you would actually break a magnetic line?
You know, they put in a highway and they forgot to douse that the blood of Mother Earth was in a river between the two villages. So the magnetic line got cut. And then the emotion of village A cannot touch the emotion of village B, and they cannot feel each other. And
wow.
the proof is very, you know, Phil Callahan is traveling down the Amazon and it's life or death. He has to know if the next village is friendly or are they headhunters. It's life or death. He must know. And how did he find out? He measured whether the soil was paramagnetic. If the magnetic line can go through the soil, the next village is friendly. If the soil is diamagnetic, the magnetic line cannot go through the soil, then the next village down the river, they're going to kill you. And he measured it and then he proved it. This is the core curriculum of peaceuniversity.net. Essentially, peacemaking is restoring the symmetry of that magnetic body, which is living, intelligent plasma, literally Gaia. And that's what peacemaking is, restoring that centripetal force, which, by the way, is rainmaking.
Wow. So then let's, I guess we can try to end it on a happy ending kind of note with, do you have any examples of maybe societies or politicians who actually are preaching these kind of policies? Or do you know examples of maybe indigenous communities that actually are like embedded, doing exactly what you're talking about, and their ideas are spreading, like, instead of all of this, you know, capitalistic garbage of steel and terrible lights?
Well, maybe there's some hints of example. I actually knew coming of age in Samoa and growing up in Crete, Margaret Mead and her partner steps to an ecology of mind, Gregory Bateson, who was with me in Santa Cruz. And they were giving examples of female-dominated cultures early. And the key component there was touch permission, literally permission to touch. So young people were actually encouraged, they were enabled to touch, and that created rain. And that's been documented lately in the patriarchy and desertification, goldenmean.info/desertify, which was James DeMeo work with, which was beautiful work, proving that the spread of patriarchy causes the spread of deserts. You can absolutely prove that anthropologically. And now we know the physics, because if the kids are forbidden to touch, the physics of why that prevents rain is because what enables vapor to become a droplet is that same symmetric permission to touch. So permission to touch is what allows a water vapor to form a droplet. Why a child can put a hole in a cloud with their attention. And so desertification and patriarchy is an example of the difference between coming of age in Samoa and Crete and matriarchies, ancient matriarchies versus patriarchy. And so that conversation then can enable us to then think about cultures within which permission for young people to have touch and therefore bliss. For permission to touch requires the discipline of symmetry. I'm not advocating promiscuity here. I'm saying that if there is a discipline that enables children to touch in a way that touch permission creates bliss and not pain, then that symmetry also enables rainmaking and enables a fractal field and enables big aura. And the perfect form of touch, obviously, is the love wave from Sentix. And now, one other example I would just mention is my partner Valerie is very dedicated to the International Ananda Marga movement, which is a spiritual tradition out of India. And she's dedicated her life to that, and I have great respect. And the Ananda Marga missionaries, which we have taught at their centers in New Zealand and Brazil and around the world, Australia, in Europe, many places, Egypt, they're some of the most dedicated missionaries on the planet, Burkina Faso. And they have a project they call PROUT, Progressive Utilization Theory, which is basically saying that all resources should be dedicated to sharing in the way that creates the maximum benefit. So it's basically on progressive sharing of resource. In other words, the highest and best intent for that wheelbarrow or rototiller, whatever it is the way in which it can best be shared. So it's literally a perfectly shareable wave applied to the physics of economics. And I think our web project, fractaleconomics.com, which was Fractal Economics, but now it's fractalfield.com/fractaleconomics. And you will see that if you design economic theory based on a perfectly shareable wave, then instead of hierarchies, you have rose petal-like shapes for distribution theory. So there is no hierarchy, it is a big fractal, and that creates perfected distribution of money, resources, energy, all of which looks like a rose, and therefore that is fractal economics. So that would be some conversation about how you would design a theory. I'm not saying any of those practices are successful now, but I'm saying there's some beautiful metaphor there.
Perfect, thank you. Well, yeah, a lot of what you shared today is definitely given me a lot of optimism and encouragement about where we're going forwards. So I think that's actually the end of our questions that we have. We're nearing the 90-minute mark, so we won't keep you any longer. So Dan, if you want to just repeat again where everybody can find you. We'll also be sharing with our community all the resources you referenced today. But yeah, if you wanted to close us off by telling everybody where they can find you.
Thank you. Well, Dan Winter at fractalfield.com. YouTube.com/Dan Winter Fractal Field, Facebook.com/Fractal Field, and info at fractalfield.com to reach me directly. Also Therify.net, theimploder.com, and flameinmind.com. Again, the intent of today's conversation was to provide just the beginning of thinking about practical tools to grow your aura. Very simple. Since every single lecture that we've done for 30 years ends with the same advice, grow your aura, please. So today's conversation was supposed to give you some handle on, you could think about a science to do that aura growing. And by the way, the book on the practice of bliss for young people, goldenmean.info/conscious kids is a very nice summary of some of these things. So thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. And I'm grateful since your Generation Z has provided an enthusiastic, shareable audience, and this is a beautiful win-win, and we all need to be a shareable wave. So thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Everybody enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
Blessings. Bye, everyone. See you. Bye. Thanks for your questions.